Good morning. It's 11 o'clock and we are starting the Go-To webinar, the NAWCA webinar. And we still have quite a number of people popping on at this time. So we're going to wait 3 or 4 more minutes before we do the housekeeping stuff and start the broadcast. Good morning. My name is Lynn Fuller. I'm the communications specialist with Pacific Birds Habitat Joint Venture, and you are attending the NAWCA Demystified webinar. We do still have a number of people popping onto the webinar, but I think I'll go ahead and get started with our housekeeping stuff and introduce our panelists and let people still kind of join on the next 2 or 3 minutes. Thank you for joining us. If anybody is having trouble with audio, you probably are not hearing me, but if you can hear me and have any other issues, be sure that you look back carefully at your invite box for any information you might need about logging in. All the attendees are automatically muted. If you have a question, please type it into the questions box. And depending on how our time goes, at the end of Dave's presentation and at the end of Molly's, we'll answer as many questions as we can with the time that we have. I'll read the questions out loud so everybody can hear them. And if we have too many questions, given our time, we will have a list of those questions, and Dave or Molly can get back with you individually with a reply. The webinar will be recorded in case you want to watch it again or miss something. And that link will be sent to you in a follow-up email probably tomorrow. So again, welcome. And I'm going to turn it over to Dave Mehlman and then to Molly Doran to give you some information about the NAWCA overview and the NAWCA Small Grants Program.
Great. Well, thanks, Lynn. My name is Dave Mehlman. I am the grants liaison for the Pacific Birds Habitat Joint Venture, and we're going to talk a little bit today about the North American Wetlands Conservation Act, or NAWCA. And I'll emphasize we're sort of aiming this as a kind of a broad, high-level introductory presentation to this granting program. I guess primarily focused for people who are thinking about applying, or new grantees, or people who want to know more information. And really, it's really focused on applicants in the United States for reasons which I'll get into later. So next slide, please. So a little brief overview of what the North American Wetlands Conservation Act is. It is a funding program from the U.S. government, administered by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, that funds wetland conservation projects in 3 countries in North America, in the United States, Canada, and Mexico. The first grants that it ever awarded were approximately in 1989, and as you can see here, we're closing in on almost $2 billion in grants to over 6,000 partners who have in turn contributed over 3 times as many non-federal matching funds. And the accomplishments are quite significant, upwards of 30 million acres of habitat conserved in North America. Next, please. Apologies about the little delay in switching slides. I do want to emphasize that, again, the North American Wetlands Conservation Act, or NAWCA, it's a voluntary matching grant program. And the idea is to use U.S. federal dollars to leverage non-federal matching funds for wetland conservation. Some little key points I mentioned already. It's administered by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, specifically the Division of Bird Habitat Conservation, based in Arlington, Virginia. The projects are actually selected by the North American Wetlands Conservation Council, which is a fully chartered federal advisory committee. And the key part is, and this is written into the law, is that each grant does require non-federal partner match, which can be cash or in kind, with a sort of a 2-year look-back period of validity on in-kind match. Next. The actual act really technically consists of, as I mentioned, grants to 3 countries, and there's through 4 different granting programs. And I'm bringing this up because while all these grant programs have the same broad goals, the sort of specifics and details and process and selection mechanisms differ between all the 4. In the United States, there are 2 programs, what's called the Small Grants Program, which awards up to $100,000 US for qualifying projects. US Standard Grants Program, which awards upwards of $1 million, actually can be a little bit over in certain special cases, again, for qualifying projects in the US. And then there's a Mexico Standard Grants Program, obviously for projects in Mexico, which actually has a slightly wider basket, if you will, of eligible activities that can be funded, and then a Canada Standard Grants Program, which is for the conservation projects in Canada, and it is actually selected through a different process. So today I'm really going to focus on the Small Grants Program. That is the program that we here in the Pacific Birds Habitat Joint Venture really recommend for people who want to get an introduction to NAWCA or federal grant awards and things like that. They're not too difficult to write and apply for. And what we're hoping to do is on a future webinar, go perhaps into deeper detail on the Standard Grants Program and things like that. Now, I unfortunately can't see who's on the webinar, but if there are any Canadian partners who want more specific information, I'm just going to say that the program and the process for selecting projects is sufficiently different from what I'm going to describe that you'd just contact me directly offline for information on that. And I don't think we have any Mexican partners on, but the same would go for that program. So next. Little hesitation here while you all admire that beautiful wetland. As an example of a recent success with NAWCA that the Pacific Birds Habitat Joint Venture has had, which we're very proud of. One of our most recently approved grants was to fund essentially wetland enhancement at the Kawainui Marsh State Wildlife Sanctuary, primarily focused on non-native plant species removal. And this brought a whole partners together, such as several state agencies in Hawaii, some nonprofit groups, community volunteers, and we're hoping to achieve a nice native mosaic of wetland types for various wetland birds, in this case, including the Hawaiian gallinule. And I apologize, I'm not even going to attempt to pronounce the Hawaiian. So next, please. So what's NAWCA all about? The key thing I'd like you to get out of this slide is NAWCA projects are focused on either protection, restoration, or enhancement of wetlands. So pretty much everything that your project, if you hope to get NAWCA funding, your project has to do one or can be sometimes multiple pieces of these three different baskets. If it's outside these baskets or kind of can't be fit in one of these categories, it is probably not a qualifying project here. And again, I'll emphasize protection includes what those of us in the conservation community might consider to be land acquisition and easements and leases and things like that. Next, please. So first question for you as a potential applicant, is your project a good fit for NAWCA? And generally speaking, the answer would be, it would be if, again, if you meet the sort of broad goals of wetland protection, restoration, or enhancement. And if you have information or you can demonstrate benefits to waterfowl and wetland associated birds, especially as sort of a subset of priority species, which we'll talk about a little later. Again, that you have protection, restoration, or enhancement components in there, and if you have the non-federal match, and of course, if you write a decent proposal. Those are sort of three, if you will, key attributes you're going to have in your proposal before you can even get started working with NAWCA. Next, please. So one of the key pieces for NAWCA is, does it support wetland birds and wetland associated bird populations? And NAWCA attempts to parse out these benefits in terms specifically of waterfowl and or waterfowl habitat. Other species associated with wetlands, such as herons, egrets, shorebirds, gulls, terns, et cetera, many land birds that live in the wetlands. Does it have benefits for threatened or endangered species, either at the federal or state level? And does it support species of greatest conservation need from whichever applicable state your project is in, or even has, does it support species or habitats that are designated in some kind of state, regional, or national conservation plan? Next, please. So as I mentioned before, NAWCA has over the years developed a list of priority species. In a sense, you can argue with me later, but not all species are equal, and some are higher priorities for conservation than others. And again, so sort of stepping down to what we're talking about here in terms of waterfowl, waterfowl priority species have been identified for NAWCA from the North American Waterfowl Management Plan. Next. And these are the list of high priority waterfowl species and priority waterfowl species for NAWCA grants across North America. Most of these, but not all, do occur in the Pacific Birds Habitat Joint Venture. But basically, if you will, in a simple sense, the more of these species that are present and that you are able to demonstrate conservation benefits for, is the better for your proposal. Although I emphasize that it's important to demonstrate real benefits in terms of, say, production or survival let's say weight gain, and then not include species that are accidental, which only benefit in a fringe manner. Next, please. Oh, I should say before I forget that I'm going to show, we're going to be going over a lot of lists of different things and maps like the one shown here on the slide. We have all this information up for you on the Pacific Birds Habitat Joint Venture website in our funding section, and it is also available in the detailed proposal instructions for NAWCA grants. So don't worry, you don't have to write it down. We can get it later. NAWCA also asks you to specify other wetland associated bird species that are going to benefit from your program. And similarly, NAWCA has developed a list of priority wetland associated bird species. And in this case, the list of priority bird species depends on which bird conservation region your project is in. We've shown here on the screen the bird conservation region, or BCR map, for the entire North America, but conveniently here in pretty much all our projects in the mainland or lower 48 parts of the US are in bird conservation region 5, the green one there on the coast. But those of you who may contemplate projects in Hawaii and parts of Alaska, you can see are in a few other conservation regions. But again, those lists are developed and are easily available. And so we'll go on. Oh, and I should say these lists are generated from the other bird conservation plans in North America, including Partners in Flight for the land birds, the United States Shorebird Plan for shorebirds, and then the Waterbird Conservation Plan for herons, egrets, and other waders. So go on next. We actually pulled out the list of the BCR 5 priority birds here, for you can see an example of what, at least in that coastal, whatever, mid-North American latitude, Pacific Coast, North America, these are considered some of the priority species. And again, the idea is the more of these you can demonstrate a benefit for from your project, the better your proposal will look. Next, please. And here we've showed you some nice pretty pictures of some of these different kind of wetland associated birds. And then this is kind of a grab bag taxonomically. Again, land birds, seabirds, shorebirds, those even Pacific Islands, albatrosses. These are all wetland associated birds which NAWCA funding can be used to support as appropriate. Next, please. So wetlands, did I say wetlands? Yes, so NAWCA is all about conserving wetlands, and any NAWCA proposal, actually regardless of it's the small or standard, you're gonna have to describe what kind of wetlands you are protecting or restoring or enhancing in your proposal, done by filling out this kind of detailed table below left. And in this case, you'll be expected to try to delineate using National Wetlands Inventory or something like that, the specific type of vegetation, wetland vegetation, sorry, that you are going to be in your project, whether there are uplands included in there, and total up all the acres of these various categories. Next, please. Partners. Nope, we went too far, but yeah, partners are a key part of any NAWCA grant. Ignore your screen. Basically, a partner in this NAWCA sense, in a real sense, is some group, organization, even individual agency that contributes match. Again, you're going to have a minimum amount of non-federal match in your grant. The minimum you'll need is a one-to-one, $1 non-federal for every dollar federal you're requesting, and to a certain extent more, a higher ratio of non-federal is desirable. As I mentioned before, it can be either cash, that's new money to be spent on the project, or in kind that has been spent on the project in the recent past. But any kind of cash, any kind of match, sorry, has to be tied to specific acres in your project. And again, the partners, we're all in this together. So the work of one partner helps the work of all the others and vice versa. And in many respects, the breadth, in other words, the kind of partners you have in your proposal, the more kinds is generally better. And again, a partner, it's important to think broadly in what a partner can be. It's anyone who's, if you will, capable of contributing a non-federal dollar to your conservation project. Next, please. Did we skip a slide? No. Okay. So to sort of go over to help you decide or if you should submit a proposal to NAWCA, again, I'm going to reiterate some things I've said before. Do you meet the goals of protecting, restoring, and or enhancing wetlands? Can you get some information on what species are going to benefit there? You're going to have to dig up some kind of information on that from somewhere. Do you have the match? From my point of view, that's extremely critical, because without match, you do not have a project. And again, as I've said, you're going to need a minimum of one-to-one non-federal match for the amount of your grant proposal, and to a certain extent higher is better. And then just sort of a side tip, which is very beneficial for us here in the Pacific Birds Habitat Joint Venture area, NAWCA has sort of a separate pot of money that is applied to projects in the coastal zone of the United States only. And we've shown on the map on the right here, in light blue, the counties that are in the coastal zone of the Western United States. And again, fortunately for us, most, not all, but most of our Pacific Birds Habitat Joint Venture projects are in this zone. And then you do have somewhat of a decision to make about a standard or a small grant. So we'll go on to the next. As I said before, we in the Pacific Birds Habitat Joint Venture recommend that if you're new to NAWCA or you haven't done it, that you start with the small grants. Now I have put the slide in the presentation. Again, I hate to get way off in the details in the weeds, but NAWCA does not and cannot under statute fund everything. Even though there are many activities relevant to conservation that are entirely worthy, NAWCA just is not allowed to fund these, neither with grant funds or with match funds. And in my experience, probably the most common examples of that are NAWCA, or one is the sort of top left. NAWCA doesn't fund kind of routine management, maintenance, or stewardship. It's sort of like it's meant to be the first stop to get the wetland protected or restored, and then it's up to the partners to keep it up in the future. And neither does NAWCA fund monitoring or evaluation of the success. Again, that's a very worthy, or I should say the success of the project or the birds that use it. Monitoring is an entirely worthy thing, but NAWCA just cannot fund that. And then depending on there's a bunch of other stuff here that I've listed that it does not and cannot fund. So just beware of that as you're putting your grant together. Next, please. So again, back to the smaller standard NAWCA grant program. Again, I'll say this again, it's worth emphasizing that we recommend looking at the small NAWCA grant program. If you're new to NAWCA or even federal grants in general, again, if a grant of up to $100,000 will accomplish your goal, and again, you have to that 100,000, you have to add at least another 100,000 in match that you're going to have to put in. So that's a $200,000 minimum project right there. We'll do what you want, and sometimes people have they need a little more than that, well, you can consider multiple phases, sometimes in successive years. And then if you have some knowledge of what's there in terms of waterfowl and birds and habitats, but you don't have really a detailed set of information, the NAWCA small grants basically is a simpler application process as opposed to the standard NAWCA, which is much more information heavy. Next, please. So that tees me up to dive a tad deeper into the small NAWCA grant program. Again, its goals are, like all NAWCA projects, to do smaller scale wetlands conservation projects that in fact might not compete well for the standard programs. The small program is trying to encourage new partners. That counts in certain extent in your favor if you're a brand new partner applying for a grant. And then other things here I've listed on the screen, and I'll point out at the last bullet we've put on here that basically the Fish and Wildlife Service, the NAWCA program, is expecting that when you receive funds, particularly for enhancement or restoration, that you'll make at least an implicit commitment to guarantee the project will last for about 25 years. Next, please. So now I'm going to talk a little bit about how does the North American Wetlands Conservation Council, in this sense, select a small NAWCA project to be funded. There are it does it through a series of basically 7 technical evaluation questions. I've listed the first 4 here. Again, the evaluators, you are supposed to describe, and the evaluators will use their expertise to evaluate how well it conserves waterfowl and/or waterfowl habitat. Again, how does it contribute to conserving wetlands and what kind of wetlands? How does it contribute to conserving other wetland-associated birds? How does the proposal contribute to listed threatened or endangered species at either the federal or state levels? And then are there other state priority species that are affected by the proposal? Next. And then on the right side are the 3 remaining questions. Does your proposal bring in a lot of partners? Does it support the goals of NAWCA to support partnerships? How is the proposal contributing to long-term conservation of wetlands, especially given that things might be changing in the future? And finally, NAWCA has been interested in what degree does the proposal allow public access? Again, the thought being, if you're spending U.S. public taxpayer dollars on conservation, the public ought to potentially have some benefit from it. And I've included here the scoring table, which is basically the rough weighting of each of the 7 questions I just mentioned here, and you can sort of see for yourself. In a sense, it's quite simple, but you obviously will have a maximum score if you can essentially max out, show benefits on all these different 7 question categories. Next, please. So how do you get it done? Well, basically, our advice is with any NAWCA grants, give yourself plenty of time, especially the first time. It always takes longer than you think to line everything up, particularly getting partner commitments and figuring out what you can do for what budget. The Fish and Wildlife Service puts out kind of revised grant applications pretty much every year. Usually there are minor changes from year to year, not too significant, but sometimes there are little tweaks that come in from year to year. And then we also encourage asking for help. Go ahead, next slide, please. Help can come from, say, us here at the joint venture, from agency partners, from more experienced NAWCA grants, or even partners who've helped with that. Again, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, the grant program website as a whole, enormous amounts of information on instructions, application template, the grant deadlines, way more detail than you'll ever want to know on what actually are eligible and ineligible grant costs, and all sorts of good stuff like that. We've put a lot of this information on the Pacific Birds Habitat websites, and we have plenty of partners out here in the joint venture who have very experienced in the NAWCA drill and can help out as needed. Next, please. So not to bog you down in the details here, but this is a rough flow chart of all the steps a proposal goes through between when you prepare it and when you get, if you're assuming you're successful, you grant an agreement. And again, the idea here is it takes a while both to prepare, sort of vet and submit the grant, and then it takes a while for it to be evaluated and selected for funding, and then cranked through the Fish and Wildlife Service processes, which result in a grant agreement at the end. I know so this process can take many months sometimes, depending on a variety of factors. Go on, please. Next slide. And so I am going to turn the program, unless Lynn, you want to take some a few questions right now. I'm not sure my time, but now we're going to turn it over to Molly Doran and have someone who has recently gotten some NAWCA grants to talk a little bit about their experience.
Thank you, Dave. I think actually we do have some questions, but I think given that Molly will go on and then we have a little bit more from you after that, we'll hold on questions until the end, but we will very likely have time to address the questions that we see so far. So Molly, you can take it away.
Great. Well, thank you, Lynn. Okay, next slide. That is our land trust. Okay, I'm Molly Doran. I'm the executive director of Skagit Land Trust, and we're an accredited land trust in Northwest Washington. Next slide. A little bit of a delay. There we go. This is Skagit County, which is where our land trust operates, and we protect a range of natural and resource lands. And our county runs from the Cascade Mountains into the Salish Sea, Puget Sound, and also has some of the San Juan Skagit Islands in it. And there's a large river running through our county called the Skagit River. Next slide. All right, so it's a very diverse landscape, and importantly, as Dave said, for NAWCA grants, we have the low elevation areas, which are coastal, but just as a tip, coastal doesn't just mean right on the coast. Look at the NAWCA maps, because coastal can run inland a ways, and it captures for us quite a ways, for instance, up the Skagit River and another river called the Samish River. So look at those maps and really look at how far coastal influence does run. Many of the areas in our coastal area are wetlands currently, or were previously wetlands, but we do have a lot of decreasing wetlands, which I believe, Dave and Lynn, you could tell us afterwards, but I think you get more points for certain types of wetlands, and we have a lot of decreasing types of wetlands and a lot that have been lost. Next slide. So we have done 4 small NAWCA grants ourselves as a land trust. And yes, a first one, we waded in and we're very nervous, and we're successful in that one, and I've been successful in 3 others. And we were also a partner, and Ducks Unlimited really helped bring us into this whole grant world of NAWCA, because we were a partner on 4 standard NAWCAs with Ducks Unlimited. And what we try to do, this is an example on the left-hand side of the screen, the Lake Creek Wetlands, is we try to build on previous grants, NAWCA grants, and we also get salmon grants, or we have other types of conservation grants, and we try to protect wetlands and river and stream corridors, and really build on it over the years, knitting together the landscape. Next grant. So we're in the northern Puget lowlands, and this is a significant area for wintering waterfowl. We have many of the high priority northern species, NAWCA species here, such as northern pintail and mallard. We have endangered species such as Chinook salmon. We've got large brant populations. Bald eagles are so numerous as to see 50 in a trees at time. 80% of all the wintering waterfowl in Western Washington are in the northern Puget Sound lowlands. So and we have a lot of wetlands. So or wetlands in need of restoration or return to wetlands. We're in a good area for NAWCA, but even so, before we start a small NAWCA grant, we always score ourselves on that little sheet that Dave showed to make sure that we're a good fit, because it's a lot of work to go run through one of these grants, both to get all the partnerships in place, but also to write the grant. And you can always check it out with Dave, who was great about telling you whether he thinks it's competitive or how to make it more competitive. So it's a lot of work to get grants, and I really, your partners here that are running this webinar and Dave are just great. Next slide. So one of the questions that Pacific Birds asked me to talk about was what was easy and what was harder. So and many of you on this webinar probably are in coastal areas, and one of the problems with coastal areas, especially with the larger NAWCAs, but even with small, is that the coastal areas are great and it's good for NAWCA, but they also are very expensive. So it's harder to get the really good cost per acreage ratio, because obviously coastal lands can cost $100,000 an acre upwards at times. The other thing is that you can't just jump into even a small NAWCA and not know your bird species. So it's good to make friends with your local Audubon or other birders and really get some bird lists going, and other lists of other wildlife there, so that when you come to do the grant, you don't just have, oh my gosh, it's late summer, I can only see what birds are there now. You have your winter birds, or you have good bird lists. We also sometimes find that it's hard to get our other wildlife data completely accurate, especially for a small property. And so you take some time to dig around and find biologists or locals that actually can tell you more about that property and the wildlife. Some other tips are to write your grant for someone that does not live in your area. As you know, we all talk to ourselves so often that we don't realize that, well, someone doesn't know anything about my county or this. So don't make assumptions. However, you're very tight on characters in the NAWCA grant for all the sections, so you have to be really terse with your words and really put good data in there. And then another tip is know your deadlines for sure. Next slide. There we go. We are very fortunate to be in a county that has great networks of partnerships that we use for all sorts of conservation. So for each of our small NAWCA grants, we try to find a real range of partnerships. So here on the left, we have a high school that we partnered with, and their work, this was on a Barney Lake property that we conserved with a small NAWCA. They're helping to do some restoration. So it's great to bring in schools. We bring in our county, Skagit County, we bring in nonprofits, we bring in businesses, we might often bring in neighborhood groups. So state grants are wonderful for helping to meet that large level of match, especially if you're using things like the Salmon Recovery Funding Board dollars or other things like that. So just really think widely about your partners. And we always think about what's a compatible level of public access that you could provide on your project, something whether that's just a small trail for hike or a viewed bird viewing area. And in that special consideration question, we tend to usually try to address climate change because it's a big issue, obviously, for coastal areas or areas with large rivers in them and wetlands. And so we talk about how whatever we're conserving through this NAWCA grant will help with the impacts, mitigating the impacts of climate change in the future. Next slide. So other tips is know where your match is coming from and get those partner commitments and letters started early. The partner, it's almost sometimes like herding cats. You might have 5 or 6 different partners and they're all very eager, but you've got to get a very precise letter in from them. You've got to know their match, and you've got to follow up with them to get their match completed, whatever it is they're going to give you. You have to know all the deadlines. So really work through those partner commitments and stay on top of those and think widely about your partnerships. Next slide. And as Dave said, if you're in a region or you already have lots of partners, think broadly about who you can bring in, because one of the things we've heard from NAWCA is that it's great. They want to get the word out about NAWCA. They want to bring in new partners and expose more people and more of the community to NAWCA. So think about, well, who's an unusual partner? Who hasn't done a NAWCA grant? Who hasn't been part of NAWCA? Is there who doesn't understand NAWCA? And think about if there's a way to bring them in to the NAWCA grant. Next slide. So this is just one example of how we have used NAWCA. On the left-hand slide is a large wetlands that's on the edge of the largest town in our county, Mount Vernon. And it is a place where the trumpeter swans that were once extinct in the lower 48 came back to roost. So very important habitat for waterfowl. But over about the past 15 or 20 years, we have knit together protection of about almost 400 acres. And that was through one large NAWCA that we did. It was Ducks Unlimited NAWCA, and we were a partner on it. And then 2 smaller NAWCAs. We're also working on 3 more projects right now with another, with a state grant. And then there's a mitigation bank that protected another 300 or 400 acres, and we can't use that for match. You can't use mitigation for match, but it just shows how over the decades you could knit together a really significant conservation area using NAWCA and partnerships. So that's what I have to say today, and I'd be happy to take any questions. And I know that Lynn was saying that if people want to talk to me about, as a grantee, about any tips or things that we've come across, I'd be very happy to answer those questions. You can just email me offline anytime.
Thank you, Molly. And we do have some questions in queue here, but I'm going to go ahead and let Dave wrap up the program, and then we'll move on to the questions.
Yes. Okay. Thanks, Molly. That was great. Awesome. Really wonderful examples of NAWCA projects. And so I'm going to wrap up here with a little bit of summary here. We've compiled for you here on this this slide sort of the Pacific Birds Habitat Joint Venture track record in the U.S. for grants, and 2 things here. As you can see, the total amount of funding received by partners is substantial here over the years. Eyeballing it, looks like over $50 million over 30 years, which is awesome. But also note the other columns. Those are all the match that has been collected by partners to go into these grants. It far exceeds the amount of actual grant dollars. So again, match is really, really important. And I will point out just a little tidbit. You'll see that right column. Actually, federal funds can be used as non-match in a grant to accomplish more acres. A little bit complicated, but there are ways to bring federal partners and federal funding into a NAWCA grant. Next, please. So what is this meant for conservation in our joint venture? We're estimating over this this 30-year period that almost 350,000 acres, well, some are in process, will be conserved in the joint venture region, including those in the Canadian portion of this. Almost 200,000 of which are in the U.S. So that's a substantial amount of wildlife habitat if you think about it. Next, please. And then again, questions. I'm from the joint venture, and I'm here to help. That's part of my job, is to help people, as Molly said, consulting on whether your project's a good idea, to little things you can make it more competitive with. Just in terms of coming up, the next upcoming small grants deadline is October 15th of this year. So if you're toying with it, you still got plenty of time, but the clock is ticking. And then next year, of course, the cycle will start all over again for another round of grants. Probably the first round of U.S. standard grants will be in February 2021. Next. I think that's actually the end of the talk with some acknowledgments. Yeah, so we're happy to move on. Any questions?
Yeah, this is Lynn Fuller again, and I'm going to just point out this slide because we use a lot of photos in our presentations and on our website, and I think it's important to acknowledge them. So I'm going to thank the photographers here, and thank Dave and Molly for their great presentations. We have a few questions, and I'll just get them started, starting with ones for Dave. And the first question is from Bob Taylor, and it's what organizations are behind Pacific Birds. Dave, you can take that, or I can take that, whichever way.
Why don't you take that, Lynn?
Okay, I've had time to look at the question. Bob, the JVs, all joint ventures, are by definition, they are regional partnerships made up of agencies and state and federal agencies, nonprofit organizations, conservation groups, and they're regional partnerships, and they all have a management board. So that management board is a reflection of some of the partners. For example, on the Pacific Birds board, I won't list them all, but we have Fish and Wildlife Service regional staff, we have Ducks Unlimited, we have Columbia Land Trust, and you can see a full listing of who our board is on the Pacific Birds website. Basically, our funding comes, most directly through the Fish and Wildlife Service. So again, more information, you can go to About Us at pacificbirds.org. And the next question is, what is the part, and I think, Dave, this is probably best for you, what is the participation with and from Indigenous communities? Are there consultations with Indigenous nations before projects go ahead? And does that affect the project's funds? Quite a few questions wrapped in there. Do what you can with that one.
Yeah, that's an excellent question. I would say, working backward, to my knowledge, for better or worse, there is no formal consultation process. However, Native Americans, the various tribes can certainly apply for NAWCA grants. In fact, some have. I have actually, in my days on the staff, actually inspected looked at a project on the Yakama Nation in eastern Washington. Some tribes contribute, are match contributors, either through cash or through wetland conservation projects they're doing on their own lands, or they can receive funds as a sort of a sub-grantee from a larger group. So I think it's a difficult question to answer for a whole variety of reasons, but part of it is, across the United States, well, across all of North America, there are different, the extent of tribal engagement in wildlife conservation, I would say, varies enormously. And so I don't know that there's one size fits all answer to that, but I think it's an area, certainly the Pacific Birds Habitat joint venture wants to encourage more and see more tribal engagement in grants. So we're happy, especially if any tribes want to work as an applicant. We're happy to help you out.
Okay, thanks, Dave. And the next question is from Monica, and it is, will NAWCA fund a restoration feasibility study prior to implementation?
No. I'd say in a short answer, no. And NAWCA would fund the restoration itself, but it will not fund, it doesn't fund upfront work.
Okay. Next question from Wendy is, can Canadian nonprofits apply for these grants? And I guess you could punt on that to the Canadians if you need to.
Yes, okay. Again, as I mentioned earlier, the process for grants in Canada is completely different from what I've described for a whole bunch of reasons. So the short answer to your question is yes. Typically, we've seen, for better or worse, typically we see the grants in Canada going to Ducks Unlimited Canada, Nature Conservancy Canada. But the best thing for you to do, well, you can feel free to email me directly, but the best thing to do is get in touch with the Canadian North American Wetlands Conservation Council's Secretariat office. I believe it's in Ottawa somewhere. I can look up the exact office and they can advise how to proceed. Again, I can go into more detail on that, but it's a very different process than what I've described here.
And Dave, I will add to that we do have a Canadian Pacific Birds Habitat Joint Venture Coordinator, Andrew, and you can find him on our website as well, who could probably be a good first contact for that.
So I will say one thing, that one of the challenge for Canadian grantees is that, again, under the NAWCA statute, there still has to be U.S. non-federal match for the Canadian grants, and under the law, unfortunately, half of that non-federal match has to come from a U.S.-based source. So that's always been a challenge for Canadian partners, I think, particularly for nonprofits, is how do you get a U.S.-based dollar to meet that requirement? So just beware of that. What trick or trap or requirement.
Great. So the next question is from Kimberly, and it is, sorry if I missed this, but would flooded agriculture, existing acres with impairments, fall under the definition of wetlands?
Yes, I think so. Especially if you can demonstrate that the soils are wetland soils and things like that. Yes. Awesome.
And a question from Natalie, can you elaborate on the ways that other federal partners can be involved?
Okay. Yes, so let's basically you can in most NAWCA proposals, you can include federally funded, let's say, we'll look at it in terms of you can include federally funded wetland conservation acres as part of the project. It's just that in that way you're bringing in a partner to contribute matching to the things like that. An example might be, I'm just sort of thinking out loud here, might be, say, the Fish and Wildlife Service Partners for Wildlife program. Maybe you're doing a wetland restoration and partners will pay for something like fencing, and you're asking NAWCA and other partners to pay for other pieces of a restoration. So it's just that way you have your wetland acres being counted for restoration. You just cannot count the federal piece of that as part of your non-federal match, if that makes sense. It's non-match. Okay. That'd be one example. Same would be for other U.S. agencies that have wildlife programs, that they can be partners in the same fashion. It just, your challenge is going to be that dollar value does not contribute to making your non-federal match.
Okay, thank you. And we have a comment from Greg Green, who I believe has done a fair number of NAWCAs or
Sure.
been peripherally involved, at
Please.
least with NAWCAs, about the tribes and cultural. Anyway, his
Oh,
comment
please.
is there is a formal process with tribes and cultural resource officers through regulatory permitting and compliance. So I'm not sure we want to dive too much further into this topic with the time that we have, but just a comment for you, Dave, and for the audiences. And we can certainly further address that via individual emails if we need to.
Yeah, apologies if I misspoke.
And then I believe the last question is simply from Monica, a thank you, which is a great way to wrap it up. And we're actually 4 minutes early, so you all get to go do something else in your 4 minutes. I want to thank Dave and Molly for the time and effort they put into this, and thank you for anyone who also contributed. And a reminder that you can reach Dave. His email is on our website, and you'll find other NAWCA resources there as well. So this ends the webinar. Thank you for participating, and you will be able to access the recorded video tomorrow via our email.
Thank you, Lynn.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
We're very lucky to have Pacific Birds. Great organization. Thank you.
All right, and I'm going to turn off the sharing, and thank you all very much.